News Radio 600 Kogo. Welcome to your weekend. San Diego Business Saturday is on the air. Coming up today, Joe Kudla from the company Vuori right here in San Diego. We've had him before. We're going to have him back. Talk about the athleisure business. I brought that up on the San Diego Morning News. It's Ted and LaDonna this week. Also, Tom Del Beccaro is going to be joining me today. I'll tell you, it's really interesting because as you heard me talk about all week on the San Diego Morning News with Ted and LaDonna right here on News Radio 600 Kogo, we crossed over some major milestones with respect to Wall Street this week. And I'll tell you, if you are a fan of large round numbers, you probably liked this week. And if you missed Wall Street altogether, let me just bring it back for you, because the Dow Jones crossed over 27,088, a record high this week. The S&P crossed over 3,000. Took us 10 years to get that 1,000 points. A record high this week. NASDAQ hit 8,200 this week. So I predict that we're going to be in the 9,000 range for the NASDAQ this year. We're going to hit 30,000 on the Dow sometime in September and October. So as I was mentioning just a moment ago, if you're a fan of large round numbers, the Dow and the S&P have one for you, because we hit those numbers for the first time on Wednesday and Thursday this week. And that's good for a huge gain in the last year. And we're just picking up steam going into the 2020 elections. Now, just a reminder, because I get emails from you all the time. And by the way, you can email me at kogo.com, keyword Sully. You can send me an email through the bigbizshow.com website. You can send me an email through KUSI, Good Morning San Diego. Any of those will get to me. But I keep on getting emails sort of asking me to take you through the Dow and this thing I call the emotions of the stock market. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, abbreviated the Dow, is just an average of the prices of 30 stocks. Though some stocks count more than others, and that's an algorithm that I'm not going to get into today, but these are stocks picked to be big, stable companies. So it's supposed to give us an overview of the health of the economy. Now, do you remember me always saying that the stock market is not the economy? They're two separate things. And I think our president sometimes forgets that. I think our president sometimes thinks that the economy is the stock market, and I think many of you do. I know I used to. It's not the same thing. It's a good indicator. But look, there's less than 40% of Americans that are participating in the stock market. So how could that be the economy? Because everyone participates in the economy. By the way, the Dow Jones was originally big industrial companies producing things like sugar and tobacco and cotton and the like. And the Dow changes the companies around every so often to reflect the changing economy. So, for example, we used to see U.S. Steel, GM, General Motors. Now we see things like Apple and Intel and Home Depot and Nike, Verizon. See what I mean? It's a different time. So we want to reflect differently. All right. We follow the Dow because it really contains only 30 of the thousands of companies that it could follow. And they're the biggest, safest companies generally, the ones most fundamental to the economy. And there's other indexes that, and you hear me talk about indexes or indices like S&P and the NASDAQ, which use many more stocks. NASDAQ is tech heavy. You'll find all of the technology stocks on the NASDAQ. It's just where this stock exchange amalgamated to S&P has 500 stocks. None of them is a true measure of the economy, by the way. But since they all usually do roughly the same thing, the Dow is the oldest and most famous, and that's what everyone talks about. You hear me say every single day on San Diego's Morning News, the Dow, the NASDAQ, the S&P, whatever it did, up or down. I want to give you some milestones just so you have some history. And I don't think I've ever done this before. on television or radio. And by the way, if you're listening, well, you are listening to me, but if you'd like to see the TV version of San Diego Business Saturday, simply right after the broadcast, go to kogo.com, keyword Sully, and you can actually watch the show, because we shoot it out of my studios here at Jump Television Studios, where Russ T. Nails and I do Big Biz Show every day. The Dow was formed, the first daily close formally was May 26th, 1896. And the Dow closed at 41. It was actually 40.94, but it was 41. Dow didn't start well. It plunged to an all-time low of 28 by August of that year. So it fell from 40 to 28 in just a matter of months. So keep in mind, the Dow started on May 26th, 1896. You know when the Dow hit 100? Keep in mind, we're at 27,000 now. Dow hit 100. Triple digits. January 1906. Okay? Took 10 years for the Dow to hit 100 points. And that was an impressive rally. Hit an all-time low when Teddy Roosevelt was president. By the way, the Fed Reserve wouldn't even be created for 7 more years. So that's 1906. And then the crash of 1929. Do you know, so let's just take a look this week, because the Dow, let's just go back and say Thursday, okay? The Dow Jones was up Thursday 228 points, all right? And that's a, what number, what does that represent? 0.8%, something like that? Do you realize in the crash of 29, which happened on October 28th and October 31st, okay, through October 31st, the Dow fell, get this, 38 points. Dow fell 38 points one day, fell 31 points the next day. But it represented declines each day of 13% and 12%, all right? So can you imagine that? If you want to do a little backwards math on that, 38 is 13% of 292. So the Dow was trading, close to 300 when it dropped 38 points on October 28th. Then 31 points the next day. Those are still, by the way, the worst one-day percentage declines in the Dow's history. 38 points and 31 points. But the lesson I'm trying to show you here is the percentages. I was on another radio station when the Dow first hit 10,000. Is when I first got into radio, frankly. And March 29th, 1999, by the way, was that date. And I just started radio a few years earlier. I think a year earlier, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 2 years. But if you think in terms of when the Dow went from 10,000 to 11,000, that's 10%. That's a 10%. Well, for the Dow to go from 26,000 to 27,000, which is where it is now, that's only 6%. So this is why these are nothing more than psychological sort of milestones, all right? By the way, Dow hit 1,000 in 1972. So it took us almost 100 years for the Dow to go from its first 1,000 points, okay? 1896 to 1972. 70 years. How about that, right? Richard Nixon had just won the election. Took 49 states. Dow included things like Woolworth and Eastman Kodak, a company called International Nickel. And sort of the next big thing in the Dow happened in 1987 on October 19th. And the Dow dropped 508 points. It was a largest one day decline in history. But didn't have a 2-day decline like it did on the original crash. It was short-lived. Within a year, the Dow was back to pre-crash levels. Did you know that? By 1988, by October 19th, 1988, we'd gotten everything back and more that we lost in that one day. And then, of course, I talked about the Dow 10,000. That happened on March 29th, 1999. And then we had the meltdown. Remember, if you heard me on News Radio 600 Kogo during that time, between 2008 2009, which you did, because I was on air, I would talk about the fact that when we hit the Dow 10,000, we had this irrational exuberance. This tech bubble was in full gear. We were having 13 IPOs a week. We hit the Dow 10,000 in March of 1999. We had another 1,000 points in April of 99. Did you know that? And 1 year later, the Dow lost nearly 30% by September. And then so we, that was the dot-com bubble bursting, and then we built it up again. Meltdown of 2008. We bottomed out, during the financial crisis, the biggest financial crisis in our lifetime. We bottomed out to 6,547. So think in terms of, I want you to take this home with you. Remember how bad you felt if you were in the market. Remember how bad you felt on that day in 2009, March 9th, by the way, when the Dow closed at 65.47. And now look at today and look at a chart. And I'll post that chart at kogo.com, keyword Sully. Don't you wish you would have stayed in and watched this thing go up 21,000 points in the last 10 years? I'll give some of that perspective for you. In fact, I'm going to bring Tom Del Beccaro on the air with us. He is a contributor to Fox Business. Wrote the book, The Divided Era. How's that for some perspective, right? There's your history of the Dow. News Radio 600 Kogo. It's San Diego Business Saturday. Welcome to your weekend. News Radio 600 Kogo, San Diego Business Saturday is on the air. Coming up, Joe Kudla from the athleisure business Vuori. I talked about this on the air on San Diego Morning News this week because Ted and LaDonna wear nothing but athleisure. All right, so as I mentioned in the open, Dow Jones, NASDAQ, S&P, all staring down the barrel of records. And again, the Dow Jones intraday hit a record on Thursday, and intraday, the S&P hit a record on Wednesday of 3,000. And again, I'll just repeat this just because I think I'm going to be accurate. We're going to see the Dow hitting 30,000 somewhere around September, the way things are going. Perhaps October. We already have hit the 3,000 mark. It took us 10 years, as I mentioned, to go from 2,000 to 3,000 on the S&P. And the NASDAQ, I believe, could hit 9,000 this year, just depending on what goes on with interest rates and such. And again, it is interesting how a soft inflation number will also trigger interest rate cuts. Here to talk about that and more, my good friend Tom Del Beccaro. Tom Del Beccaro wrote the book, The Divided Era. He is a frequent contributor to foxbusiness.com as well as fox.com. And he also runs a website, politicalvanguard.com. And although we don't get political on this show, I like to talk to him about one of the reasons that we are going through such a prosperous time on Wall Street. And of course, where it's going to go depending on the election. Because one of the things that Tom pointed out to me, which in all my years of television and radio that I didn't really take a look at, is the fact that markets tend to go sideways in election years. And you look no further than a 10-year, 20-year chart of the Dow Jones, and you can see that. Last year, we had those midterm elections, Tom, and you're absolutely right. We went sort of sideways for the entire year. We're seeing great trajectory this year on all fronts. I think we're predicting similar trajectory going forward. Are we going to see another sideways year next year? Because I think it might be different, because suddenly you're going to see wage stagnation stop over the next, 3 to 18 months, just in time for the election. That may help out the stock market. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I think you're an optimist.
Probably so.
And capitalism is based on optimism. You often say, correctly so, the markets move on fear and greed. and you're not using greed in a bad way, but right now, the fundamentals of the economy are pretty darn good. And the American markets are superior to the exchanges overseas. Growth here is better than in Europe. The Chinese and Asian markets, some of them are rocked by this tariff process. So it's good to put your money in America. And so there's reason for the Dow. Unlike in the Obama years when money was put into the Dow in part because of QE3 and the like, or QE 412, whatever we got to. I think this time the Dow's moving up is an indication that the economy is healthy and will remain healthy. So the question becomes, I liked your prediction of 30,000. It could well do that sort of thing. The question as me, who's a political observer and a market observer, is this is the real question. Is the market already assuming Trump re-election?
That's a great point. It's funny. I have not heard anybody say that yet because, again, buy on the rumor, sell on the news. That's interesting. That's really interesting because it may have.
Well, think about it. They just had those debates, and they're offering some pretty radical changes, right? If you terminate, as some of them want to, all the leaders apparently, private health care insurance, I think if that happened tomorrow, that would rock the markets, right? But somehow, even though they're saying that sort of thing, Sully, at this point, the markets don't seem to be shaken by it. So I think there's reason to believe it'll do well, as you describe it, unless there's some large apple cart being upset, maybe severe difficulty with Iran. But still, I think if form holds next year, as it gets really rough and tumble, it could well be that the markets move sideways again.
So what's interesting for me is taking a top-down look at this economy. And look, again, you might love Donald Trump, you might hate Donald Trump, but if you really think that about Americans in the last 24 months or 36 months, armed with a newfound proceeds, for lack of a better word, from the tax bill, American consumers started going shopping. And as a result of that, our economy, our GDP, our gross domestic product, the primary indicator used to gauge the health of a country's economy and the health of its citizenry economically, it's the greatest determinant of our strength as a nation and the well-being of the American people. And we are seeing one of the best economies since Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan brought forth annual real GDP growth of 3.5%. Barack Obama was lucky to average 1.6%, and he inherited a miserable 2.1% from George W. Bush. So it's interesting. I mean, Donald Trump hit a 4.1 at one point. What I'm seeing here is, and we talked about this on the Big Biz show this week with you and I'm seeing that you've got an economy and a stock market that are singing along, but not everyone has participated yet because wage stagnation has not, or I should say wages have not caught up with the recovery. And that's pretty normal. It takes about 3.5 years for companies to get back where they were, where they can start paying more money. I think it's going to time out perfectly where you're going to see wages and wage stagnation come to a cease and wages start increasing over the next 18 months just in time for the election. Again, might Donald Trump be playing chess when everyone else is playing checkers? Because he's going to get a rate cut. Wages are going to go up and the stock market's singing along. Again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but you can't ignore the obvious here. This guy waves a magic wand and things happen.
Well, he waves the right policies, right? And the rate cut is interesting because myself, Larry Kudlow, Laffer, Steve Moore, Forbes, a lot of people have tried to get policymakers to understand that if a recovery is driven by investment as opposed to government spending, that investment over time leads to a greater amount of goods and services and actually like a glut on the market, let's say you suddenly had a glut on the market of certain cars, the value of those cars would actually go down. Well, what happens with prices is that when you have lots of goods and services coming out, prices don't tend to jump up. They actually trend down. And so there's no need for the Fed to use as its model that they should raise rates to cool growth, because as we've seen in the last 18 months, there hasn't been upward CPI pressure. And so I've been calling for a rate cut. Not that I'm as important as Larry Kudlow, but he has called for a rate cut. The president has called for a rate cut. I think we're going to get one. And the market, as soon as that came out in the last, 72 hours, the market responded. And that was this week's dynamic. And I think it's going to continue. So yes, I have been bullish on the economy a lot more than a lot of people. In fact, I said that we would have above 4% growth the second quarter of last year, and I was one of the few people nationally that called for that. There would be that burst of energy. I think the markets are responding to this strong economy, but I still think that if there's uncertainty in the election, probably starting in February of next year, you'll see the markets not jump up like they have been and go more sideways.
So, by the way, Tom Del Beccaro joins us. He wrote the book, The Divided Era. He runs a website called politicalvanguard.com and tomdel.com. He's an analyst. He's a writer. He's an attorney. He's a keynote speaker and of course, a political and economic analyst. I have to ask you going forward, something that we haven't paid attention to. I mean, the crisis du jour, or I guess maybe it isn't a crisis anymore. U.S.-China trade talks have gone on the back burner. Might that be something that we need to worry about economically and through the stock market here? I mean, I know in Southern California here where we all live, when we heard news of a potential Mexico trade problem, boy, that would roil a city like San Diego and, of course, Los Angeles and all surrounding areas in the mega region here because, of course, we've got a $2.5 billion manufacturing supply chain that depends on our ability to trade with Mexico. You think that's going to rear its ugly head again, or do you think that was tactical in nature, Tom?
Well, I still tend to believe that Trump prior to the election, or really the next June, because that's when presidents want their policies to be in effect before an election. I still think he's going to make some sort of deal, at least on certain aspects of it. I'm against omnibus legislation, meaning waiting until you can fix everything at once, because you should fix some things right away, right? If you have a broken pipe in your house, you don't wait till all of them are broken to do comprehensive pipe reform. So I think there are things, parts of the China deal that he will make, but as far as the markets are concerned, if the Fed's on the side of lowering rates, then I think we can have a calm future unless Iran gets out of control and unless China becomes provocative as well. Yeah, sure, that could be a bump.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, fingers crossed. Tom, thank you so much. Tom Del Beccaro, The Divided Era, politicalvanguard.com, tomdel.com, and his book. The guys from Vuori coming up. It's San Diego Business Saturday. News Radio 600 Kogo. News Radio 600 Kogo. It's San Diego Business Saturday. Welcome to your Mother's Day weekend. Aren't you glad this week's over, at least with the market? Things are going to get better, though. I can promise you that. Thanks again to Christina Gustin from UBS Financial and Patrick DeHaan from GasBuddy.com. I use GasBuddy.com almost every day. That's where you hear all my wisdom in the energy market. I'm ripping off from Patrick, so you can go find it yourself there. Every week I get to interview an interesting CEO in San Diego. And sometimes we bring in, some heavy hitters like Steve Forbes and such, but I like the San Diego heavy hitters, and I especially like the ones that have homegrown their business here in San Diego. And you've heard a number of those stories over the last few months. I can tell you one of my favorite stories, only because I like the guy so much, and it was such an interesting, disruptive idea. And you wouldn't think there's anything in clothing, especially with respect to men's clothing, that would be disruptive. When you think of men's clothing, I'm not talking about those Robert Graham shirts where you flip up the collar and such. I'm talking about a vertical called athleisure. Athleisure is when you see in your local grocery store the mom or the female wearing what I'm just going to use the brand name, Lululemon pants. What you used to work out in and just work out in and go home and change into your everyday clothes, people are wearing every day, and that's called the athleisure sort of business. Well, Joe Kudla from Vuori saw that opportunity. He is the founder and CEO of Vuori. They're one of the fastest growing active lifestyle companies, apparel brands in the U.S. They have a very, very loyal fan base in a very competitive industry. I always ask myself, who's the guy that's going to wake up in the morning and say to himself, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go compete with a namesake like Lululemon or a namesake like Quicksilver. And that's exactly what he did. I mentioned the story before we got Joe on the air about he and I talking at one point, and he said there's 5 million men in the U.S. that practice yoga. I, as you know, don't happen to be one of them. However, none of them were brand loyal, and what they were doing is they were surreptitiously looking in the men's section of Lululemon when their wives were shopping there. So embarrassingly enough, they felt like they were wearing their wives' clothing. And Joe saw an opportunity there, and that's where the story picks up here. Joe, great to have you along today. That's about close, right?
Yeah, spot on, Sully. Stoked to be here. Thank you so much.
So here's the deal. So you started out as an accountant, CPA. What was it? Were you an analyst?
Yeah.
What? Tell me that story.
Yeah, I worked in the audit practice with San Diego's Ernst & Young.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah.
So you were a bean counter.
I was.
So you were filling in little boxes with your pen and numbers and stuff like that.
I would. And now I'm getting audited, and I understand what those guys were going through on the other end.
Can I ask you, what was the leap that took, because you were obviously an active guy. You were always an athlete, surfer, outdoors guy here in San Diego. What got you to say, okay, I got a pretty good deal going here. I got a degree. I got a good job. I'm in a stable profession. It takes a long time to get here.
Yeah.
What made you give all that up and think that you could do something so ambitious?
Man, well, first of all, I'll say I'm a sucker for the old adage that says when you're on your deathbed and you look back and you say, I didn't take that risk. I knew that I would be one of those guys if I didn't jump when I saw an opportunity. And so I guess I would first and foremost say that. But there was kind
so you couldn't live with yourself if you didn't do it.
Yeah, I'm always one for taking the risk and taking the plunge. And I'd kind of set up my lifestyle in a way that it wasn't going to be catastrophic if it didn't work. But I was definitely walking away from a really great career when I decided to make this decision.
So what's step one? What was talk about the germination of the idea? I mean, the day that you said to yourself, this is where because you could have gone in a number of different directions in the apparel business. What made you go in that one direction?
Well, to kind of fully understand it, it's a culmination of a lot of things. But, I did study accounting when I was in college. I played USD played lacrosse at University of San Diego. And when I graduated, I got this really random opportunity to go and model in Europe.
Okay.
And my friends still give me a hard time about that. But
well, who wouldn't? Because, if you're going to go model, we're going to make fun of you.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
So I went over there. I graduated from college, and I headed over to Europe, to Milan. And I had an incredible experience. I was supposed to come back and start work in the fall at Ernst & Young, and I met a lot of incredible people, had a lot of incredible life experience, and I decided to postpone that. So I spent 2 years traveling the world doing that, and I did actually hate being a model. I didn't like being in front of the camera, but I loved watching the designers and what they did to build these assortments of product and bring ideas to life, and it was just very inspiring to me.
So when you were there, you're doing a photo shoot, but you were able to, in between all of that, go back and watch how they did it. And you realize, oh, this is how it's done. Because there is a secret sauce, let's face it. Who hasn't wanted to put a T-shirt out because they had a really cool... people, there's a secret sauce in my mind about restaurants, because not all, you could put the restaurant in the greatest location in the world and it's not going to be guaranteed to make it. You could have the coolest t-shirt, coolest pair of board shorts, whatever. It's not necessarily guaranteed going to go.
No.
There is a secret sauce, and I think you learned that there by going and watching, where it all started, correct?
Yeah. I mean, in a way, I think it was just really inspiring to watch people. It was a peek behind the curtain, and so it demystified it a little bit. I'd always loved product, and I grew up without, a lot. Our family was rich in love, but not material things. And but I always loved watching brands, and I loved product, and I loved gear. But I never had any intention of really doing anything in the space. But going overseas and having that experience gave me a little peek behind the curtain. But it wasn't until many years later that I decided to actually do something in apparel.
Sure.
So I had returned from that experience. I went to work with Ernst & Young, got my CPA license, and started a consulting business in finance and technology in my mid-20s, and had built a really great business over about a 10-year run here in San Diego. And it was about that time that I got into yoga as kind of the first restorative thing I had ever done to heal my body from a lot of back pain.
Okay.
And that was when I had that aha moment.
So the light bulb went on and said, "Okay, wait a second. I'm doing yoga in board shorts and a Lululemon t-shirt here, and this ain't working."
Yeah, absolutely. If I looked at the market at the time, you had the mainstream athletic brands that I grew up with, the Nikes, the Under Armours, and they were really competing on cost, not quality. They were distributed at mass retail, and the way that consumers were shopping and interacting with brands was evolving and changing, and there was this whole new kind of vertical, this D2C landscape that was opening up to us. And Lululemon,
So this is a behemoth, man. I mean, if you think in terms, look at it, just like we were talking Uber earlier, Uber really started the gig economy. Lululemon, I would argue, started the athleisure business.
100%.
In other words, and I say that, and I want people to understand exactly what I'm saying by that, is that, guys always wore shorts and gym shorts and stuff walking around. That was just guys. But at some point, there became an outfit out of a woman wearing a pair of Nike shoes, a pair of Lululemon athletic tights, a shirt with her hair pulled back, and a baseball cap.
Yeah.
Suddenly that became a thing.
That was a fashion statement.
And it's still, and that's not going anywhere because it's comfortable.
Yeah.
It looks good, and they can go right from the gym to the grocery store to whatever they're doing.
That's right.
But guys never had that.
No.
And how, because I have to tell you, I wouldn't have recognized the fact that we didn't have that.
Yeah.
How did you figure that out? Was it necessity as a mother invention? You were in yoga and were uncomfortable, or how did that work?
It really started out of you hear a lot of entrepreneurs say it. It's a little cliche, but it was we couldn't find what we were looking for.
Okay.
Lululemon had a small men's assortment, but it was in the corner of their stores. It was pretty much an afterthought. And at the time, you had a lot of other brands that were launching to follow. We call them Me Too brands. They were essentially following in Lulu's footsteps, focused on that female consumer.
Right.
Nobody was paying any attention to the guys. And, I was really fortunate to have found yoga as a practice that was supporting me in my life at the time. And I looked around and I just kept seeing more and more guys showing up to yoga. But what was interesting about the guys showing up to yoga is maybe they didn't identify themselves as yogis per se. They were surfers, they were mountain bikers, they were runners, they were professionals. They associated with all of these other things, but they use yoga as a tool to keep them in the game, so to speak, and keep them healthy.
Guys are riding bikes, they're sore, they go in. Guys are lifting weights, they're sore, they're inflexible. Guys are surfing, they're inflexible, they have an injury.
That's
It was almost like an also ran, like I'm also going to do yoga.
Yeah.
At the same time, it started catching on, and then suddenly.
Yeah. And we watched what Lulu was doing, bringing product to this market as an afterthought, but people were adopting it and buying it in droves because it was better construction, it felt better, the quality was better. People had never really felt athletic wear like that. So my hat's off to them. They really did create the category, even in men's, to go way up channel when the rest of the market was going down channel.
Sure.
They created this category, and we were really inspired by that. But here's the thing. Lulu always felt like it was our wives' deal.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, honestly, when you nailed it when we first told me that in 2015, is it feels like I'm wearing my wife's brand.
Yeah.
It feels like, look at, it would be like I guess it would be like a gal, wearing Under Armour.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
absolutely.
Right? I mean, Under Armour makes great stuff, but
That's right.
it really isn't categorized for women.
That's right. Yeah. And to take it one step further, we also looked around where we lived, in the most beautiful place in the world. Thank you, San Diego.
Sure.
But, we are very, very fortunate to live in North County, San Diego. It's this stretch of coast in downtown, Encinitas is where I call home. But, it's this incredibly aspirational place on the coast, and there's a look and a feel and an effortlessly cool personality of this town. And we wanted to carry that spirit into activewear. When you looked at what a lot of the bigger brands were doing, they were inspired by team sport athletics or kind of urban street culture. Even Lulu, originated in Vancouver, very urban inspired. And we wanted to take our inspiration from our backyard, and that's the beach, the place where we spend all our time, where we love to call home.
Well, and the interesting part of this is as you talk about some of those brands that you went straight up against. I mean, you were in you still are in a very competitive space with massive brands like we just talked about, Under Armour and like Lululemon and even Nike. What's interesting though, as we take a look at this stuff, is did you ever think that those massive brands would start changing the way they're advertising and changing the way they're designing because of this little brand called Vuori? You've changed not just your life and your industry, you changed their industry too. We'll talk about that coming back in just a second. His name is Joe Kudla. He's the CEO of Vuori. It's spelled V-U-R-O-I. We'll tell you what that means in a moment. You can go to vuori.com. Check them out. You can also actually go into the store in Encinitas. I'm sure there's other locations across the country too. We'll talk about that, but boy, what a great story. We're going to talk a little bit about what it took to carve that out and about how important our San Diego culture is to the success of this company. It's San Diego Business Saturday. I'm Sully, News Radio 600 KOGO.
Oh, wait a second, man. What do you think the teacher's going to look?
San Diego Business Saturday, News Radio 600 KOGO. Great to have you along today. By the way, catch me weekdays for the time being and for George Chamberlain in the morning with the San Diego Morning News with Ted and LaDonna. Also, KUSI Television in the mornings on Good Morning San Diego, and of course, Big Biz Show with Russ T. Nails. We've been around for 20 years. That's national television and radio. You can find us at bigbizshow.com or follow me on all platforms at Sully Speaks. While you're online, I also want you to go to Vuori.com. That's spelled Vuori.com, and it is the brand that was created by Joe Kudla. Joe Kudla is our guest today. He is the founder and CEO of VuoriClothing.com. By the way, do you have more? You have your store in Encinitas. Is there more than one store they can walk into in Encinitas, or is that the place? Because you can find Vuori in Nordstrom, you can find it everywhere.
Yeah.
But the actual store is just in Encinitas, right?
Yeah, that's right. We have a store in Encinitas, we have a store in Manhattan Beach, and one in the Marina on Union Street in San Francisco.
Wow.
And we're opening likely 2 more this year.
So, but speaking, let's just jump over there. That wasn't your main deal, walking into a store and buying clothes. You went B2C from the very beginning, didn't you?
We had to. It was out of necessity. I like to tell the story of when I first launched, I carried 2 suitcases of samples to New York and walked into any retailer that would talk to me and got a lot of no's. And almost out of necessity, we had to pivot our strategy away from wholesale, i.e. selling to other retailers.
Is that how it was done at that time? Basically, was it you'd walk in, you'd try to get a pitch with somebody, and they look at it and they say, yeah, this is never going to fly.
Yeah, for the most part.
Yoga's for women. Athleisure wear is for ladies. This will never work.
It was a little early to be talking about this category for men. Yeah, it was very focused on women. A lot of retailers were still trying to address that concern where their customers were walking in wearing Lululemon, and they needed to address that. So if they were looking at this category at all, it was for women, not men.
Can I ask you something? Because I do want to talk about the B2C, but fast forward to now, the success. I mean, as I see you in Inc. magazine, I believe you did something in Forbes. I've seen you on national television. This story has gone viral about this surfer, and they love to call you a model surfer. Like you've been categorized into a caricature, by the way. Right. You're no longer an accountant. You have no brain. You're just a surfer from San Diego that created a brand, right? You realize that's how it's going to be.
Right.
Do any of those buyers that said no before have they ever tipped their hat to you? Do you ever, because you're in their stores now. Yeah. You realize every place you went to in New York, I'm assuming, now carries your stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's come full circle for sure.
Not for you to point your finger in their chest, but have they acknowledged that's that kid that was knocking on the door?
I hear it a lot more from investors that call me that turned down an opportunity to invest in the business in the early days, more so than I hear it from buyers. But yeah, I mean, everybody's so excited about what's happened with the brand, and most people are just, congratulating.
Just for the record, me and my group tried to invest in Joe, and he had enough money he wouldn't take it. He didn't need it at that point. let's talk about the B2C. So you went to these places, knocked on the doors. You got a lot of no's.
Yeah, we got a lot of no's, and so we were actually rewind the clock, back to 2014, 2015. We were kind of running out of money. We had raised a small friends and family round. We were kind of running out of money, and
by the way, just for our listeners, the friends and family round is that literally seed round.
Yeah.
It's most businesses when they go to raise money. It's a term now in investment banking called friends and family. And it's prior to you going out there and actually doing a real raise. It's basically telling all your friends, hey, I got this idea. I got my own money into this thing. Can you kick down $10,000, $20,000, $30,000? Mom, dad, credit cards, everything you can. That's the friends and family round, literally, isn't it?
That's right. And it's not easy to do when you're trying to present an apparel opportunity.
It's the hardest thing to do.
It's kind of like, and you'd liken this as a musician, but it's kind of like going to your friends and saying, I'm starting a band. We're going to be the next Rolling Stones, and I want you to support me.
I want to stop down on this for a minute because Uber because I saw your investment pitch. Yeah. You'd already raised the money, but I was, this is general partners in a VC. I wanted to hear about it. Imagine Uber going to their investors and saying, I have this idea. We're going to be the biggest taxi cab company in the world. We're not going to own one single car. We're not going to have one single employee. I mean, honestly, you were the same it was the same sort of uphill battle. Yeah. But there's a reason guys like Jeff Bezos, who invested $3 million, made $400 million yesterday on the IPO of Uber. There's a reason that you guys that took that chance in the beginning, if you go public or if you get acquired or whatever that path of liquidity is going to be, there's a reason they should get that. And I think that's a lesson in risk reward because it can't be easy in the beginning. Right. It would never work that way. If it was an obvious one, you wouldn't have been the first to market in this space.
That's right. A lot of people did.
And hats off to those investors who saw the foresight of that, right?
Absolutely. We're so incredibly grateful for those people that took that risk. But yeah, going back to what we were saying, it was tough sledding in the early days. Our strategy to launch through other retailers was a little bit flawed in a lot of ways, and we had to pivot quickly. And so we were fortunate to be early in Facebook and social media advertising, and that when we focused our attention away from wholesalers to our direct customer and building a relationship with them through our website, through great customer service, through delivering product and listening to what they had to say, that was really the pivoting and defining moment for the brand. We started to define that engine of growth, and we could show investors the path to profitability, and the rest was kind of...
one thing I never saw with you guys was influencers. A lot of apparel brands, to their credit, we'll find an influencer that's very visible. I mean, let's take Michael Jordan is probably the easiest one to think about, or Tiger Woods, right, with Nike. Unless there's a yoga star that's on ESPN right after bowling, I haven't seen him yet. Right. You guys didn't take that route necessarily. You took a lot of like-looking individuals, a lot of like-lifestyle individuals, and it all came down to your influencer was culture. Yeah. Versus person, right?
Yeah.
And it was San Diego culture.
Yeah, that's right. We really thought, this way of life here in San Diego is very aspirational. Who doesn't want to live the California dream? And surf brands had been exporting that lifestyle to the rest of the United States for a long time. And nobody had really brought that same DNA to athletic wear. And so we wanted to be authentic. It was who we were, sure. We resonated with the surf brands that kind of originated in our backyard. We wanted to bring that spirit, that aesthetic into activewear.
By the way, just so you know, they don't just make men's tight. In fact, they don't make it. I think they make some sweats, but this is shorts. This is board shorts. This is shirts. There are some things for women. I mean, I can tell you, you already know this, and I will tell you, even though Joe's a friend of mine, I refuse to pay anything other than full retail because I want to see your business grow. But I'm in that damn shop like once a month. I'm sure that your people tell you. I have to ask this though. For those people that have small businesses in town and people that have dipped their toe into the Facebook, Google advertising world, it's good to hear that it works. But it's not, you can't just throw money at it because it's very prescriptive, isn't it?
That's right. Absolutely. You have to have a strategy just like anything. Otherwise you are throwing your money away.
Because you can't just say, I'm going to spend $10,000 on Facebook advertising. That doesn't matter.
No.
There's a prescription to it, correct?
No, and you've got to be really, you have to be very intentional with who you're targeting, right? Who are you presenting those ads to? What happens after they've seen an ad? That's just the beginning. That's the top of the funnel. There's a long path to purchase. So, we're establishing messaging and building trust with the consumer all the way to purchase. And then after they purchase, how are we taking care of them and nurturing them back into their second purchase? So it's a science, it's an art and a science. And
it really is, because I've seen it with our programming we do, and I've seen it with music where you can go from nothing to something without necessarily going viral and being on TMZ.
No, people ask us all the time, what was the tipping point? And we didn't have Kim Kardashian wearing our products. We weren't on Oprah.
Nobody was tweeting about you.
For us, it was just slow, steady growth, making the right brand decisions at every step of the way and delivering a great product. You know, our product, we believe very strongly, is very differentiated. We say it's built to move and styled for life. That's our design ethos. So everything's going to transition from workout to everyday wear. That's like the cornerstone and hallmark of our brand and why people love it so much. But we invest so much energy into making great product, and it all leads with product. The world's too transparent of a place right now. You can't deliver a bad product. So, we put our money where our mouth is. We invest in product, and we hire really great people.
Well, and your consumer is skeptical these days because we have so much research at our fingertips. You can't phone it in anymore.
Right.
I mean, that's and not to say that that all brands don't. All brands go 100% all the time, but sometimes they don't. I guess this last piece of this thing for the social media side is that does give that sheds a rainbow of hope for some small businesses who don't have the resources, just because you probably will never do a commercial on national television out of necessity. You'll do it because you think it's a good idea, but you won't do it as your main focus. Like you'll never be the Nike guys because you don't have to.
Right.
At the same time, I just can't see Nike. Now that they've already gone down that road, deploying a social media campaign that's going to make any difference because they're already. Do you think you'll ever use traditional forms of advertising? You'll ever need to, other than just for fun to see what happens?
Believe it or not, a lot of the kind of older school ways of reaching customers are coming back in style because your cost for reaching a certain audience size on television has come down, and you can do programmatic buys on television where you can actually get very granular with the types of households.
So a Super Bowl ad in Opelika, Alabama, right in the middle of halftime, right?
That's right.
Isn't that sort of how that works?
Yeah, I mean, you can get very specific, and so it's a great way of reaching an audience, and it's all about getting your message out there in whatever channel is available to you. And it tends to start on digital these days, but it can end in television, direct mail, and billboards.
I consult with enough businesses, off air to know that I know that a lot of people think the holy grail is social media, and I want to let people have people beware about that. And I'll give you music, for example. We released a single in September. And I thought, we had to get our search engine out. And our digital media guy said, there's not a single person that's going to listen to your music that's going to search for you on Google. That's not where you go. Did you guys hire a digital media strategist at the time, or did you guys kind of create it as you went along? Because that exists now.
Yeah.
But how did you do that?
Well, when we started the business, it was just our head of marketing and myself. There was only 3 of us, and we kind of just had to figure it out on our own. We hired a digital marketing agency. There's a lot of them out there that are great, that have a lot of insights, and they're great at getting you out of the gates, so to speak. But when you get to a certain point, you do want to bring that knowledge in-house.
Listen, man, I could talk to you for 3 hours. You know how much I love this brand. VuoriClothing.com, VUORI. His name is Joe Kudla. Man, best of luck to you. I can't tell you how happy I am for you.
Thanks
I wish I would have met you a month earlier because I would have got in the deal. But I love to see the success out of it, and I love to see it. I love to see what you're doing over there. I really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on. All right. That does it for us. Thanks so much to Christina Gustin and Patrick DeHaan, and of course Joe Kudla from Vuori Clothing. Isn't that a great story? Got another San Diego CEO. San Diego Business Saturday, News Radio 600 Kogo.